Give it a few seconds there. Hey guys, this is Chris from DiasExMachina, and we are talking about the company. We're going to answer some questions, but the thing we were looking at most is right here, which is the I'll say the 99% final version of one of the Affinity books. We have Taurus. Conestoga is about 30% done. I'm going to show a little bit of a preview for that one. If you have any questions, I have a couple that I've been queued up from other sources. And if you have a question you want to ask, drop it in the comments right there, and I will address them. Occasionally when I look over to the left and look at things and so forth. But we're going to go through this book, and its final page count, we go really fast here, is 225 pages, I do believe. And so it's a bit lower than I thought it was going to be. I think it's just because of the way the font and the way the layout works, and because I cut out most of the story segments, not because of really time per se, just because I told a completely different story. Not necessarily the story per se, it's just the structure. When I conceived Affinity originally, there was a looping nature to the narrative. So if you started Taurus, it began with somebody having a dream from Conestoga, and then you would have a story throughout all the chapters, and then the end would start with somebody having a dream of paradise. And the dream of Conestoga, the beginning, was actually the climax of Conestoga. And then the sequence at the end was a prequel to Paradise. If we're at Paradise, it would do the beginning of the end of Taurus and the beginning of Conestoga and so forth. But the idea that no matter which book you read the ending of one and the beginning of the other. So it was this infinite loop that no matter if you read the whole story, there was no way of doing it without having it ruined in some way running the stories. And it's an interesting little idea, but I eventually abandoned it just because when I started writing the full novel, I couldn't create that looping structure in a way that I liked, and because the Affinity novel doesn't completely finish. I thought I was going to resolve the whole thing, but after 563 pages, I realized that wasn't going to happen. So we're going to go through this. I'm going to see what do I have here on the queue. Why the tan parchment look, and do I think it's tired by this point? Oh, okay. Well, obviously, if you saw the original Kickstarter, you knew that we were hitting that look anyway, because the Kickstarter look and the look of this are basically the same. So that was the look we were always going to go. I actually have not seen a lot of tan parchment themed role-playing games, but I admit I have not read a lot of role-playing games. I mean, outside of the few games, like I was talking to a friend just on Friday about, for someone who's been gaming for 35 years, I'm surprised at how few games I've actually read and or played. So when I look at my list of role-playing games I've read, maybe 10, maybe. Games I've actually played is significantly less. I mean, you can say Dungeons and Dragons, and I'll just use an encompassing for all versions of D&D, West End Star Wars, Palladium Robotech, Mechtin, Cyberpunk. I think I did Rifts once. And I think that might actually be it. I can't think of another one that I've actually played. And then I'm just running D&D almost constantly since early 2000s. I don't think I've actually changed systems. I mean, I've written for them. People say, like, what about Fate Core and Savage World and all that stuff? Well, I didn't design the Savage World and Fate Core editions. Someone else did, and I have actually never played Pathfinder. I know the system because it's an announcement of 3.5. They didn't change very much. It wasn't very hard to write for, but I've actually not personally played a Pathfinder game. Likewise with 13th Age. But 13th Age is very much mechanically similar to 4th edition, which is a system I also knew very, very well. So it wasn't hard for me to write for that system despite not having played it. So yeah, a lot of the games I haven't played. I have no idea how Savage World of Fate Core works. So whenever someone asks me, is there going to be a Fate Core Savage World version of this game? I'm like, well, if Chris Stilson wants to do it, and if he's interested in doing it, there isn't a lot of compensation because we don't make a lot of money off of those. And we'll probably get into that a little bit later. But I've not seen a lot of games that have this parchment look. I mean, I've seen, obviously there have been a few, but I don't know whether or not it's accurate to say it's tired by this point. Because I personally haven't seen it. I know there's a few places that have gone that route. Um, if there was an inspiration for how this look was, there was a part of me that was kind of always eyeballing a really, really, really old game from the 80s, I think. And that system is called Whole, which stood for Human Occupied Landfill. It was a satirical game. It was also post-apocalyptic, and its shtick was that the entire book was handwritten. You can literally, it was carefully handwritten. I think in the 80s, it would have been really hard to have done that. Nowadays, you can just grab a font. I was going to do that for this setting, but fan blowback was pretty high. They wanted something that was more legible. They didn't, they liked some of the things I was doing, but they wanted the final book to be legible, which is really too bad, because I really, really, really wanted to have that look like that was thematically matching. And now I feel it's a little jarring, but I sacrifice that for readability. But no, I don't know if it's really random by that point. What were the results of the Kickstarter survey? The survey we ran just last week was for the 3 variations of the cover wrap for the standard edition. We're going to post the slipcase as well. And the slipcase has 3 options for that as well. So the next Kickstarter we're going to run is going to be about that. But no, I don't have the survey results yet. I think we're skewed to a certain one, but like everything, it's never like 95%. It's not like a choice in Mass Effect where it's like 95% of people cure the genophage or something like that, or 90% of the people don't kill Rex. When it comes to these ones, unfortunately, it's not going to be a situation where 90% of the people wanted this. But last time I did a vote like this, no one was really angry with the results. I don't like. There's not been a single comment. There's been dozens. There hasn't been a single comment of someone's like that. You go with this option. I won't approve. Almost everyone's just like, well, I like them, but this is my favorite. Only one person said I absolutely hate this option, but in the end, I can't really see them having an issue, because once we go our final decision, because some games may not offer that democratization to their fans. I like getting feedback, and it's best to get feedback before than after, and so forth. Okay, let's go back and go through this a little bit. So this is the inside cover. So I'm going to be deleting this page just so these things are being skewed correctly. But I'll show you first I didn't realize this was Mark Meer when Nick drew it, but this is actually one of the first illustrations, and we always kind of plot Mark Meer. It's going to be becoming a tradition. He's in Ultra Modern. He's in this one, and the only issue that we were supposed to have a consistent theming, which means there would be a person that looked like Mark Meer in Paradise and Conestoga, and I don't think we actually have that, unfortunately, which is too bad. And we're kind of tapped out and kind of in a time crunch to do that now, which is a little too bad. But it would have been really, really nice to have had him replicated 3 times. And maybe I'll do that because I'm still doing Paradise and Conestoga, but I don't think we ever have another normal human face in the other ones. I have to check with Nick on whether or not it is capable of doing that, and whether or not it'd be a real pain in the butt. But this is look. This is oddly enough. I composed this myself. The illustration was Nick. The logo is Nick, and this is Nick. But the composition of the image is mine. And I and so when you have all these little elements, these are all, there's like a dozen images here. There's a little bit here, the spackle here, spackle here. If you really look careful, a lot of these get replicated, and I try to do my best to make them look different, but I only have a certain number of these. So I'm going to go really quickly and delete this page, and that's going to make things even. So this is how the game's going to look in the inside page. This is page 2, this is 3, and this one's page 4. This is our standard. And once again, you're going to see a lot of these aspects of this worn book, and the whole idea is that this was supposed to be kind of an insetting tomb, and it's going to have, that's why all the illustrations look like they're painted onto the page. You'll see a lot of these kind of weird damage assets. I try my best to try to make them not really impede, and sometimes they're kind of humorously almost in the way and not. And sometimes I make certain things transparent, like tape, so you can read through it. But I'm sure some people are gonna have some issues, like I can't read through the tape. I'm like, well, I made it easy. I can say how much I absolutely love InDesign. For those people who don't know, like when I started doing some writing, it was in 2006 when I published. Well, until I started doing professional publishing, and I released the first book in 2008, a few months before fourth edition came out, and that was the original D20 Amethyst, which was for 3.75, or no, 3.5, and it was very interesting because I didn't have access to any publishing programs, and I was very poor, and so I actually used Microsoft Word, which don't ever do that, especially in a version of Word that was that old. You might be able to do a better job with it now, but it was very tricky to make a layout using Microsoft Word. But yeah, the original D20 was made using Microsoft Word, and then ever since then, I shifted over to Publisher, which came included with Office, so it was free, and that's the system I was using, and I used that for all the amethysts, and it only started causing a lot of problems recently. And ultra modern, it proved to be a real nightmare. If I were to open up an ultra modern file, like the old ultra modern, it would it shows you how how different and how much difficult it is. So like this is the InDesign file for one of the Conestoga ones, and you can see I can scroll through the whole document. This is one chapter quite easily. There's some elements. This is not even close to being finished because I've only refined like the first 2 pages, like that page and this page are the only ones we have done. And I love the fact that I can hot link and it's very easy to switch back. But if I go in, I should have done this before. I go in and open Publisher. Here's oddly enough Conestoga again, and you can see right off the bat how long it takes to load up. So it's loaded up. There it is. I was copying a file, so let's get that out of the way. So you can see how jerky it is. And there's no illustration, like there's no images. There's virtually nothing that should be dragging it down. And if I want to switch to another page, it takes a couple seconds. And this is still a file that has very few assets. The ultra modern files are huge, and that was a complaint a lot of people had because the file ended up being really big, and so it was such a nightmare. If I wanted to have an image and I wanted to move it, for example, to do it, like I said, it's really hard to move. It's like it's shocking how horrible the system is. And but I, of course, being a hard ass like myself, it was very difficult for me to move on to a new system. So I realized I had no choice, and I had to work with a new system, and even minimizes the screen. We're still waiting. How long it takes to minimize the screen. I'm just going to open up this file because I'm not willing to wait. No, kids down. Okay. So I just find that just funny. So, okay, take that out. We don't need that up, or so we can actually see the file fully. So yeah, I finally switched over to InDesign, and I can't believe I took me this long to do it. It's so much easier. Having this contents page built basically automatically with a couple of features was really quite nice. But yeah, actually, I haven't added the index there yet. This is about 99%. These are our credits, our special thanks. We have Kickstarter backers. This is basically a copy over. Going to our next section, we have this is the only section that's somewhat repeated in all of the chapters. There's always the first chapter is always called Affinity. This section is basically the same in all the books, except for this book. And we see the Taurus is circled because this is Taurus, and then Conestoga is circled. Everyone has their own unique font. So this one has a unique font, and we can actually see the other font. That's the Conestoga font, and that's the Paradise font. I had another font for Paradise, but it proved such a nightmare. I switched to this more traditional route. I really liked the Paradise font I had, but it ended up not being a good idea. And we have Nick's illustrations. We have 3 artists. We have Jeremy Simmons, who's a cartographer, and he drew a couple of images as well, which we'll see. Memphis Wong, who's a new artist that came on board. They helped do some weapons and some armor. And Nick. And there's not a huge juxtaposition, and there is some jarring between the two tones, but I tried to make sure that they were aware of our visual look. Let's go back to that mode. There we go. So this is the other thing I did. I also removed, actually, I included most of the files from Ultramodern that you needed, other than the classes. So you technically don't need the Affinity books. You don't technically need to get Ultramodern to use Affinity. unless you need the classes. If you want the classes, then you have to go to Ultramodern. But if you wanted to go into Paradise using just traditional D&D rules, you can. I put all the new rules for Ultramodern in here. So we go into the broad rules of skills and so forth. And when we go into combat as a weapons, we have all the combat rules in there. So everything that you need from Ultramodern is in here, other than the classes. This was an illustration that Jeremy Simmons did. And like I said, these are a bunch of assets here and here. And once again, there's a few things where it kind of impedes. And ultimately, I like the idea of like these being painted in, but then somebody writing a bunch of notes later. That's why we have scribbles here and scribbles everywhere. Let's see. Vagrant has a question. When you were working on this project, were there any roadblocks you ran into while designing it that took you by surprise? Roadblocks. Well, it's kind of obvious that COVID was a roadblock because it slowed down the process from China. There were two big roadblocks. One was waiting for other people, which is something that's always been I always appreciate people who can do everything themselves, like they can do art and they can do writing. And obviously, if I was doing all my own artwork, and then on top of writing, maybe it would take equally as long. But I like hiring people for art just because it offers their own unique vision. They can try to contribute, and as a reason why I go with Nick, because he kind of reads my mind in that regard. But we had huge delays in our work, which is the reason why I had to bring another artist in, because we were so delayed. I only got the final artwork for these books about 2 weeks ago, and like I said, these were due at the end of November, and now we are near mid-April, and that's when I finally get all these files done. Same thing with being an editor. Everyone says no matter how good you are with Grammarly, no matter how good you are with word processing and rereads, you need another set of eyes as an editor. And my editor wasn't at that time available, so I brought a new editor on board, and that their results are really, really good. They're very, very thorough. But they also, once again, promised these files in November, and I still don't have Paradise. Paradise has an absolute deadline of the end of this week, because I should have Conestoga done this week, and which means I have to start moving ahead because I can't really be delayed anymore. And the other that was the first one, waiting on people. Second one was going to be China, because I didn't care for Togo, the printer who did Ultramodern, so I dropped them, and we fielded a bunch of requests. And one company in China really came forward, offered us a lot of options, gave us some good prices, but in the end, it proved to be a complete nightmare. They took so long to answer, and they had so many problems with their files. Like Togo, we sent them the exact same files we sent Togo for Ultramodern to do a reprint of Ultramodern, and they could not get them to work. They were constantly asking for tweaks. I spent hours. I sent them a dozen variations, and every single time they're like, "This is not working. You have to do this. This is not working. You have to do this." And finally, I said, "Enough, I'm done." And they were even to the point of offering to bring their own graphic designer to redo the game. And I'm like, no, that's going to cost money. I'm not going to pay for that. If you can't make this file work, then I'm going to move on to someone else. So I did. Found somebody else. We have a new printer on board, and I'm really liking their price. I'm liking their communication. We will see. But I do not want to have to hunt for another printer for my next Kickstarter. I want to keep that, because that added a few months trying to finalize these things. But hopefully that's now done. So anyway, let's continue on. This, I guess you'll see a lot of these. Originally, in the way we did an Amethyst, we had this universal piece of folding paper, and I used it everywhere, and then I resized it, and it was fun, but it worked for that application. Here, my problem was the fact that I really wanted to stress that these were because I do these quotes. I did this for Amethyst, and it's becoming my thing, where if I want to explain something where the dry third person doesn't really convey the thought, and I realize there's an emotion and going into what I'm writing, then I would just dive into a first person and write it from the first person to convey the thought better. And then I would assign some kind of quote to it. And I was actually thinking of taking out these kind of attributions to this thing and just having these, but I decided to keep them anyway. So then somebody would affix these, and in Amethyst, they're floating atop the page, and then the text wraps around it, which never really made thematic sense. Why would text wrap around a piece of paper that was attached? And so we decided to stress that, and we had the tape. So it kind of proved that this piece of paper was literally taped to the inside of this book. The problem was, of course, it was using the original format, which we did with Amethyst, and you can see that with when I was looking at it with the publisher files. And then, I think I can bring it up once again. If we go off, have lunch, and wait a few minutes for this to pop up. Okay, so this was the file, and this is the same image. This type of paper was in Amethyst. We carried it over. But so whenever we see files like that, right, something like this, we can see the text wraps around it. And sometimes I actually have these in the center and the text wraps around it, which works from a legibility point of view, but doesn't work thematically, because why is the text wrapping around an image that was taped to the outside? So I had the idea that these were covering up other things, either information we didn't want people that someone didn't want people to see, or in this case, illustrations that the person doesn't want us to see. So these are all of these little paper inserts are covering illustrations that you can't really see. Now, if you own all three books, and it's a bit of a spoiler, you'll know that these papers are covering up sketches from the other two books. So at no point am I not showing you this. If you want to see what this is, then you have to own one of the other two books. In this case, this is I can tell this is a medium power armor from Conestoga. Sometimes it's really hard to tell what the image is behind it. And in some cases like this, it's actually fairly obvious. And then we do it again. Like I said, and the tape, sometimes I do let the tape intentionally go over things. I like this kind of look of it. It's actually blocking the word glossary. And sometimes we make the tape transparent so you can read what's behind it. And we'll see some examples of that later. But I can't really appreciate it. And the image it's covering up here is one of the magic items from Paradise. And just like Amethyst, we conclude the chapters with a story segment. We saw at the beginning here, we had a little preview of the chapter. We introduce a story. Now, sometimes, again, Amethyst, I just told the story. I just flat out told the story. I didn't worry about the context between the chapter and what's being said. Here I did a little bit, but ultimately I wanted to make sure that this was all in sequence. So you could technically read a story. It is in chunks. So if you want to read the full story, obviously I'm not going to include all 163,000 words into this book. So it's only maybe 5,000 or 6,000. So if you want to read the full story, buy the novel, which should come out around the same time, or listen to the audiobook, which my guess is going to be probably July or maybe August for that to be finished. But yeah, and I not gonna lie, this game is probably for mature audiences. I think there are a couple of swear words might have gone through. On to the next chapter. This is convex. I can really see there's a mistake here. I got to move this image to the left. The reason why this image got shoved is that because of the automatic repaging of InDesign, which I absolutely love, so I don't have to keep on changing the page numbers across the bottom. If I add something here, it adds an odd side page, which shoves this image to the right. And when it shoves it to the right, it screws it up. Actually, I probably already fixed this. I think this is not a new binder. I think this is an old binder of the files. So there's probably a final file here that we're not looking at. And this is another situation where in this, I've actually covered a bit of the words. So you have to kind of understand that this says instinctual awareness, but unless you can read it, and I don't mind doing that. I like having some fun. I might make that a little bit more. Oh, no, there's a period there, so the sentence doesn't keep going. That one, that's interesting. That's a sketch of the Plex Codex. This one, I think, is the chapter start in Conestoga 2. This is the inside of the torus, because as we know, that torus is like a donut, and that's the name of the world. It's called the torus. And this is the inner sphere, and the idea of how big this is. Now, we can see that there's a little bit of, seemingly like a village, indicating that this, like if this is trees, that this inner column is potentially only maybe a couple kilometers tall, and that's not the case at all. It's actually several hundred kilometers from this end to this end, because the torus from one side to the next, and we can see that the way it looks here, we can see some of the images and distances, that it is several large enough, the fact that the square footage of the torus is actually the same size of the Earth. just wrapped inside of a donut, so there's no sky. And we have a map. And the map was done by Jeremy Simmons. And once again, we went for this approach that it was kind of painted on. It looks loose and so forth. And we have these regions. The black lines are the artificial canals because there isn't enough water in this whole area. And we can see a little shape of what the world actually looks like. If I see any more mistakes, I might write them down on a piece of paper to make sure I fix them. There's another situation here when we're taping over things and stuff like that. That's an image from Paradise. I don't know what that is, but it's probably Conestoga because I do alternate. This goes into every single book starts off with talking about the world. It talks about it in a broad sense and then talks about the kingdoms. And this is an illustration. This is one of Nick's earlier illustrations of the Taurus. Even this is not 100% accurate. Once again, we have a situation where if that city is supposed to be in scale, this should be only maybe 20, 30 kilometers across tops, and it's actually several hundred kilometers across. So it's one of those things where it's difficult. There's actually, someone made a piece of animation, very simple animation. It's actually very hard to find. I don't know how I stumbled into it. Where someone literally did make a 3D render of a world inside of a Taurus. I saw it way after when I decided this. I was like, oh, someone actually did it, and their scale is actually correct. So there's a sun moving on the inside, and it literally does look like continental growth and so forth. So you wouldn't in this scale. These would be a lot wider. The mountain would be smaller, and you would barely see the town. But that's somewhat difficult to convey. Same thing with Conestoga. When I show you a Conestoga scale is also off. The Conestoga vessel is about the size of the United States. And so in the illustrations Nick gave kind of indicated it's a lot smaller, but it's not. It's actually really, really large. There's a, what? Oh, there's a line going there. So yeah, this is just, this is an illustration of a canton, which is some of these towns. There's a lot of steampunk imagery you'll see here, even though technically we're not steampunk. This is another little bit there. And then we go through generically, and then we add another chapter, and then we go into Rails. Now, Rails, like the chapter 3 in all of the chapters, generally is a more of a deep dive, and this is when you'll start seeing the rhyming nature of the setting, where there's a lot of things that are familiar between the two of them, especially starting in chapter 3. This is where I start to really like. I love the fact that I haven't flattened this image yet. Like when this goes to print and when this goes online, this image will be flattened, so you wouldn't see the background behind it. But in this situation here, for a split second, because there's something wrong with the way it's rendering, you can see the original illustration behind it, which is funny. I might have to figure that out why it's causing that. But yeah, for a split second, you can actually see the other illustration. This is, it's doing it again. That's very weird. And this was happening yesterday before the stream, so I know it's the stream. So this is one of the ground movers, and it's really interesting. I took a lead from Ridley Scott and Alien, and when Nick and I were designing these, I said, put some people in for scale. So we drew some people in for scale, so you can see the size of this train. This train is slightly larger than a normal train, and we go to this train, we can see this train is a lot larger. This is very annoying. Maybe if I do that, it's not full screen, maybe that'll help. Nope, it's still causing it. I don't know why that's causing that to happen. Nope, it just doesn't want to do that. That is so annoying. It's only on the right-hand side. Yeah, it doesn't happen when I'm altering the screen. All right, we'll just have to get used to that and move on. So we see this illustration here. We can see this guy produces a scale, and we see this thing's the size of the building. But when we went to this one, this person wasn't in place, so I digitally added this guy right here to show you how big this thing is, and you realize this thing's, it's like the Chrysler building. It's just gigantic. This thing is like 12 stories tall, and I love the fact you could just add a little person and it changes the scale of this thing, because this could easily just be a full-size train, and you can have a person here, and this could just be a slit for no other reason. And now we create a situation where this is the cockpit of this giant city-sized train that even puts the Snowpiercer to shame. We have privateers, steamliners. This is a steamliner, and when we get to these now, at this point, when we get to arcs, there are 12 kingdoms or 12 nations, Affinity, and they all have the same names, and they all have kind of similar history. There's a mistake. There's a gap there. Got to fix. So, and they all have the same names. There's Rago, Aquino, the Corvus, Drago, Iridius, Villani, Hydranus, and so forth. And so their names are all copied between the three. And their histories are similar, but I never copy paste their history here. Their histories are all kind of unique to the setting, but their names are basically the same and their relationship the same. Corvus and Villani have an alliance. Villani was destroyed about 10 years ago by Arago. That's constant in all three settings. And as a result, these banner images, these are one of the few images that you will see in all three books because they are universal. Hydranus, Calum, and so forth. There's Villani, and I'm accentuating Villani because Villani's past is critical to the modern history of the story. All of them have a timeline. Conestoga's and Taurus's timelines are very short. Paradise is a much larger setting. It doesn't have as much mechanical rules, but has a much bigger setting, and that's why its timeline is a lot bigger. I have another question here. Last year you worked on a film. What was the experience like? Okay, that's not really gaming related, but yes, I've been working in and out of films for a couple of years. Either I was helping with a script, and I wrote a script. I have a name on a script for a TV show, and I was so completely rewritten that not a single word or idea that I contributed made it to the final cut. And so, even though I appreciate the result and I appreciate that my name is on it, if it actually went to arbitration to the Writers Guild, my name would have been taken off because nothing about my script made it through. But they felt the need to kind of respect that, and so they gave me that, which I appreciate. I have a co-producer credit on a short film, which I also had no creative involvement on. And I did some work on a couple of things, but it wasn't until I got to be a script supervisor last Christmas where I started to work. But it ended up being not a great experience. I liked the people, but it was very boring, and the climate conditions were miserable. I had holes in my boots, and I almost got hypothermia. And I was in so much pain. I swore I would never do it again. And then, like 5 months later, I got hired to do Weight of the Heart, and Weight of the Heart was a fantastic experience. One of the best experiences I've had in a very, very long time. The people were delightful. I loved the director, and unlike before, I actually had stuff to do. I had to actually alter the script. There was a bunch of on-site rewriting I had to do, so a couple of my lines actually made it into the final cut. I'm not speaking about my review of the film, but I did enjoy the experience. I had been asked to join again a couple times, but my priority now is for the Kickstarter, so I won't be doing that right now. And of course, we were supposed to do a short film 2 years ago, Aerial Alpha, which is something that I was writing and producing, and a good friend of mine was directing. And that we were literally 3 weeks away from filming, and COVID lockdown hit for the first time. And now that project probably won't be going forward, which is a really damn shame. But yeah, that was my experience working on a film. I'd like to do it more often. So we go past this. Yes, I added a couple of coffee stains. I like that. I think it's funny. This is actually a rejected sketch. You won't see this as a final anywhere, but I needed to throw this thing, and I think it's covering up in the Gamaji from Paradise. Life chapter. Once again, all these things are. I know I got this fixed in the final, so I'm not sure why it changed them, but I guess this is something I'm going to have to address. I'll have to re-render these files, but the overall presentation is basically the same. So this chapter for all the books are generally going to be the kind of race chapter, and I'm using the term races because people know when I say races in D&D, you know what I'm talking about, rather than the fact that they're kind of moving away from the term race, and that's why I kind of avoid that the best I can. But there's sometimes we just have to kind of use the vernacular to kind of understand it. In Taurus, we I think it's 3 or 4 races, like 4 races, new races for each one. So the effigy are more of an esoteric concept. They're effectively ghosts that can manifest as a physical body when they're touching a totem. 90% of the time, it's going to be a weapon, like our main character Sloane, which you can see here. Hers is a sword, and she has these trinkets. Now, I always visually imagine that these trinkets were also running along the top of the blade, as well as a kind of an homage to some Chinese weapons where there were literally links of chains going up the swords. But this is a pretty good interpretation. But it could be an axe or and so forth. It's not really often armor. because you have to be able to kind of let it go at some point. And when you let it go, you become ethereal, but you can't rematerialize as you're touching your totem. So there's a massive situational. So if something could be ethereal or will, that be game breaking. But if you're in a situation where you have to be touching an item to be ethereal, and you can't carry that item with you, and it can never go ethereal, that means you're limited. You can't go ethereal into the next room and then do something. You have to then come back. It's great for scouting, but that's really about it. And I don't think it's terribly game breaking personally. Yes, you'll be able to circumvent some terrain, but once again, you're in a situation where you might not have the option to rematerialize. So that's the effigy, and like everything else, I always throw in some extra feats. Humans obviously aren't really changed, but we throw in their stats. Loginoids are robots. Now I know we had robots in Ultra Modern. I wanted to make them different. So the Loginoids are kind of like, they're an AI, a kind of supernaturally intelligent AI that is able to create a body through magnetism and force fields. So it literally assembles a body out of spare parts, and that's why it looks like it's made out of junk. It's slightly inspired by the kind of bug beast from Keanu Reeves' Constantine. So if you hit him hard enough, he'll just shatter, and then he'll just put himself back together again. So it's an interesting set of rules, but I like just the approach of how that worked. Well, there's another mistake kind of fix, and that's them. And then we have a Loginoid feat, and we actually have a couple of them. Then we have Zodiac, and the Zodiac, I don't know where the Zodiac idea came from. Despite what you might think, I had this idea before Mortal Engines, which has something similar. But the idea, this is a zombie, a sentient and still cognitively aware zombie that's implanted in this power armor called a scaffold that prevents his body from falling apart and keeps him alive. And it's a magical power armor. And the fact that it keeps his soul in place and basically keeps him alive, even though it doesn't regenerate the injuries on his body. This looks more like a spacesuit. So it's not this is not really 100%. I mean, I thought it was okay. I thought it was pretty good. I like the visual look to it. He did another sketch which was completely wrong. But I always considered it would be more of an exoskeleton, kind of like what we see with Elysium, or with Edge of Tomorrow. That kind of the jacket system, but imagining a zombie inside that can actually talk. And he has a bunch of feats as well. And then we have our languages. I always talk about languages because I would like a whole bunch of different languages. And we actually have mechanical computer languages and assembly and a bunch of other things. And then we have new backgrounds. And these are the background styles I carried over from Ultramodern, from Amethyst. I'm not a huge fan of the way D&D does it, where it's like 3 different tables. Instead, I create just one table with 8 different potential backstories that you can roll or select. So that's just the thing I carry over. So we have a couple here: Iocon, the Clacker, which is mechanical, Communion Cavalier. This is most of the time whenever you see these little images, especially if they don't mean much, like it's this wanted poster, which I assembled myself. Which is a rejected sketch of the Blackjack in Taurus that covers up an illustration from Conestoga. And then we have some of this here. This is a knight behind it and some text. And this is an actual extra. This is the only one that really belongs. These 2 I inserted because I was trying to keep these tables to be unbroken. And so I had these gaps. And the way to fill the gaps is just fill them with stuff. And you'll see that a lot later. Like here, for example, once again, we're wanting to keep these tables consistent. So these are this piece of paper here and this piece of paper there. That's covering up a Paradise sketch. That means that's what's probably a Conestoga sketch. But these are actually from an adventure I published called Fistful of Dragons, which you can buy on DriveThru RPG. Was it tough to balance how hard sci-fi you were going to go with this? You put a decent effort into making a lot of this scientifically possible. I always write my fantasy to be sci-fi, and it's not like I'm directly trying to quote Anne McAfee, because Anne McAfee has often said that the Dragon Riders of Pern and the Pern series is sci-fi, not fantasy, and she has expressed the reasons why the Pern series is sci-fi and not fantasy. And she's kind of a point. It'd be like saying that Avatar is a fantasy or it's sci-fi. And everyone says it's sci-fi, even though he doesn't. There is an element of magic. There's riding dragon-like creatures, but it's still a sci-fi because of the way its setting is established. So when I write Amethyst, for example, I write Amethyst to be scientifically plausible, and I created in my opinion, a bunch of reasoning to create a magical world in a scientifically modern, realistic society. Most of the time, there are compromises. One of them is like, by the way, we're proving that Catholicism is real, and the Abrahamic God exists, and so forth. And that's not very scientific. But trying to find a situation where we could have magic and magical elements without turning to deities or breaking from the logic of our real world. And that's when I started coming up with these really complicated scientific formulas based on string theory. When I was doing Affinity, the trick was that each one had a different ratio of sci-fi fantasy. So with Conestoga, it's about 80% science, 20% magic. And Paradise, it's 80% magic, 20% technology. And in Taurus, it's supposed to be 50-50. So there's always been an element. And the way I did it with Conestoga was have psionic powers that were kind of inspired by the game Outriders. And then everything else be hardly scientific. And there's still some things that are unrealistic. That the ship is like 7,000 kilometers long. It no one would really build. I can't see any alien society building a ship like this for any reason. But it's still meant to be scientifically realistic, and so it's never considered a fantasy, not as much as like Star Wars would be. Taurus, I always call it 50-50 because it's a steampunk setting, and all steampunk settings, in my opinion, are fantasy. They're not sci-fi because steampunk is in itself so completely anachronistic and unrealistic. If you did not have gasoline and internal combustion and you went all with steam, there's an upper limit of what you can do, of what you can accomplish. There's only a certain amount of energy that you can acquire from steam. So what you see with steampunk is unrealistic. And then the idea of this, and this is where I dislike the steampunk setting, was when it goes to this extreme where people are walking around with exposed brass and stuff like that. And it's like, you know what, that's just an artistic view. And I like the mechanically plausible steampunk where it makes sense. And I actually like stories that aren't really steampunk, but they kind of like that aesthetic. Like Martin Scorsese's film Hugo, which is not steampunk. It's as much a realistic film as you can possibly have. There's virtually I don't think it has a single element that's paranormal or unrealistic, but the visual look of the film is very, very brilliant, very beautiful. And the same thing with the His Dark Secrets, which is like the Golden Compass, that series, such as on HBO, and they made a movie about it. Everyone talks about how steampunk it is. I go, it's not steampunk. There's no steam in it. It has a weird paranormal magical power source, and it has a lot of things that you may look at steampunk, but it's not steampunk because there's no steam. So, and I've gone on rants, and people that make notes about stuff like they love the term punk, and I went on there's a video on my channel where I rail against what I dislike about the term, because they lump anything. They lump Victorian speculative science fiction into steampunk. Like, no, it's Victorian speculative sci-fi. You can't retroactively call it steampunk. It's the type of technology that they had at the time and what they thought the future was going to be like. Same thing with Art Deco. I don't like atomic punk. But sometimes I have to use that term, so I intentionally say the term steampunk for Taurus, even though technically it's not steampunk. It has a magical power source called a hydrocell, so and it vents steam to give you the visual look of steampunk. But I'm not technically steampunk because I don't use steam, so it's a bit of a rant there. This is a sketch from Memphis, and then we end that chapter. We go into magic. Once again, I gotta fix this. And there's a magic chapter in every one. Some are larger than others. With Taurus and Paradise, I have a completely new magic system that can still be recognized as a spellcasting system. The magic class in Conestoga is very different. I still consider it a spellcasting class, but it may not look like a spellcasting class because it does not have spells in what you consider spells. The spellcasting class here, we were just doing some modifications to it, but is based off of deck building. I love the idea of carrying over board game mechanics into 5th edition. I did it with dice drafting in Ultramodern, and now we're doing it with deck building. So the idea you're using a traditional 52 deck playing card, and I like the fact of using a deck of cards in a Magic system tied to a steampunk setting, because there is this old West aesthetic. Like some people say that steampunk is entirely Victorian England. That's the look of steampunk. And if you shift that same type of weirdness to the Old West, you either get Weird West or you have some other punk. I hated the idea when someone made cyberpunk and steampunk, and then sometime about 10-15 years ago, somebody made 30 different punks, and I was like, please, why did you have to do that? I didn't want you to do that. Yeah, some people do associate the Weird West steampunk with the Victorian steampunk. And Taurus is actually more the Weird West steampunk, just because from the visual standpoint, like you don't see a lot of Victorian. In fact, there's also, I was mentioning about Art Deco. There's a lot of Art Deco. A lot of the arcs are Art Deco. A lot of the trains are Art Deco. But then people wield steampunk-inspired weapons. The idea of using a deck of cards in a Western setting for Magic, I felt made a lot of sense. This quote wasn't big enough to fit this, so I literally added another illustration and used burn marks to cover it up. And let's go with that, get that out of that, because that's going to give me a freaking seizure. This, like I said, this was Nick's interpretation. I can never really get a 100% idea of what I really liked. I really liked, there was a game called Grimslingers, and it had these wonderful illustrations of smoke, yellow smoke drifting from people's eyes. And I really wanted to recapture that. And this was his approach to do this. Like I said, I probably wouldn't have done this look. Like I said, he has a cape, he has a top hat, and he's bald with some stuff on. It's a cool look. I may not have gone that look if I was doing the artwork myself, but that's the reason why I give people free to do things themselves. So the Chaos deck, the way a system works is that you start off with the 4 aces, the 4 twos, and the 4 threes, and that's the standard deck everyone gets. And then you can and every time you get a level, you can do one of 3 things. You can, if you have 2 of one type of card, you can get the higher number. So if you have 2 threes, you can get a 4. And you can also remove a card, but you can't have fewer than 12 cards. And you can also gain 1 additional card of the current level that you have. So if you have a 5 card, you can get another 5 card, but you can't get a 6 card unless you have 2 5 cards. And that's how you build your deck. And then you can slowly remove it. You also get 1 joker in there, and that joker is your kind of critical failure. If you go down to 0 hit points, you add another joker, and then every time you take a long rest, you can remove a joker, but you always have to keep 1 in plant. And then so you draw and you draw a card, and it tells you the power level that you get to use. You can use your spell. You can name your spell before or after. And there are these things called analogs and regulators, which is where we kind of take the Magic steampunk elements into the story, where you have a device like a thelometer from a Golden Compass, which is a device that looks like a compass but does not work like a compass, and uses this magical stuff they call dust. Ours is smoke. And we have a bunch of them. And ours is, we have analogs and regulators. An analog is something that these Oxymasters use in order to channel magic through to create the spell. And some spells require that you build analogs. So we actually have rules here where, the other ability the Oxymaster has is being able to add specific face cards that do things. When they draw, they do little magical things. So there's a lot of cool stuff. Kings, and you can once again, same things before. You cannot put a queen unless you have 2 jacks. You can't get a king unless you have 2 queens. And then there's a bunch of passive powers that you can just add as well, including a mechanical homunculus, so forth. There are no archetypes, but you can pull archetypes from Ultramodern. And you can also forego it and gain additional kicker. So if you don't have Ultramodern, then that would be your solution, is to just do that. And then these are the spells. And like I said, the whole point is that you have these analogs, and there's a bit of balancing in play. You can basically cast any spell that you know. And sometimes you can cast a higher level spell if you take a massive penalty. And sometimes that includes physical damage. And we'll show that in a little bit. But you have to build these analogs, and analogs have weights, and it tells you how many analogs you can put in, and so forth. So there's a bunch of rules on how to build these analogs. And and so forth. But yeah, where's the damage push? Oh yeah, we just passed it. So if you go one level above, you take 3 damage, you get 6, and so forth. And so you can go as much as +4 above. We originally had this system in place, and there were complaints that no one would ever use this system because you were suffering too much damage. My worry is now they're using it too much, so I may have to look at it and see how that works. So the spells are still listed kind of more traditionally. We still have casting time, range, components, duration, very similar to what you see. Some of them are slightly reworded, but they're basically exactly the same spells in 5th edition. But now they have these power levels, which is the power level of the card you draw, or the power level you decide to set and have you suffer damage, and then it tells you the effect it has. And there are multiple tiers, and some of them have a old weird west steampunk. There's one that's a gunstorm where you throw bullets in the air and they fly around and stuff. But some of them are pretty much standard. When we get to the monsters, I'll explain how monsters work in these settings, because I was trying to find ways for people to add in other monsters, because if I had to create every monster that you could encounter, the books would be too big, and I wanted people to include other monsters, which is the reason why I always make my systems universal for 5th edition, so you can pull monsters from other games. So this is a big section. There's 10 tiers here of spells, and some of them are pretty powerful. Stream, Storm, Existence, Altered State, Taurus Drop, and then we had double the chapter and a double ring there. Let's see. It reminds me of the notes in Ultramodern 5. Mechs don't make practical sense, but they're cool. So here's some rules for them. That's actually a quote from one of my teachers. Bob Crook was a teacher that was very much inspirational to me. He said, robots are like mechs are like cool to look at, but if you could build a mech like a giant mech, you wouldn't need to. You could build a tank that would do the same job. Another question: why was Affinity delayed? So I already kind of talked into why with the other question, and Affinity was delayed because art assets took longer, editing took a lot longer, but also gave me enough time to add in more content, because I added a bunch of new content while I was waiting. So I think the end result worked out, and I got to master my InDesign. So I think it worked out for the best. In the end, I think my when I posted my estimation, I said the digital books would come out in February, so we're about 2 months late. So it's not a huge deal. It is what it is. Okay, get that out of the way. Moving on. So these chapters, the weapon gear chapters in Conestoga, when we get to it, I had to split the chapters into 3 because they were so large. So there was one chapter just for weapons, one chapter just for gear, and so forth. So it's because, and the same thing I had to do with firearm rules in Taurus. There are so many guns and armor. I made it its own chapter because it's so freakishly large. So once again, we have the firearm rules carried over from Ultramodern. And then we have inscriptions, which is the way I do magic. And the idea, the fact that there are these magical words and you inscribe them on weapons and armor, and they make them magical. So you're not going to see a lot of traditional magic items, but you can grab an item and inscribe something magical to it, and it becomes magical. And once again, unlike Paradise, which does not have a power system for their technology, which we'll go into when we do those, with Taurus, there is this thing called a hydrocell. But hydrocells are very interesting, the fact that they don't run out. So if you have something that's hydrocell powered, it lasts for as long as the plot dictates it. We also have a crap ton of more terminology, which is the reason why I felt I needed to copy all the rules over, because we ended up changing a few things. And to say that there's a lot of guns in this game is putting it mildly. I think I know there's over 100 weapons, and only a handful are copied over from Ultramodern, and some of them have been altered. So the 10 gauge break pistol, 12 gauge automatic revolver, baby pistol, band revolver is a new weapon. If you ever want to know what these weapons look like, I have some illustrations later on the book. But if you see something and go, what is that? What does it look like? Check it in Google. Go to Forgotten Weapons, which is a YouTube channel that I fell in love with while doing this research. If he had a weird gun, I put that in there. There were very few exceptions. I found every single weird, bizarre, old firearm I could find. A lot of them from the Old West. Cap lock pistol, for example, and the idea of the fact you had a cap lock pistol, if you want to know what that looks like, or the Grape Shot weapon, which is down here. It's what it was what Ed Harris was wielding in Westworld, so that's popping in there. We have flintlocks, and the whole idea is kind of an inverse of amethyst. The number of magical inscriptions you can apply to a gun is directly proportional to how primitive the weapon is. So the crappier the gun is, and the more of a pain in the butt it is to use, the more inscriptions you can add. And that's the balancing, because most of the time you see, well, why would I get a Dragoon? Why would I just get a weapon that does the same amount of damage? And the idea that the 12 gauge Dragoon, which has got a flintlock and one buck shot, is very, very primitive. But you can get 6 inscriptions to it, so you can do a lot of stuff. And yeah, technically, some of those illustrations can make it easier to reload and load it up. So yeah, technically, you could use some of the inscriptions to make this weapon exactly like another weapon that does the same amount of damage. But you could also use it to make each round considerably more powerful. So caplock, cutlass pistol, which is just a sword, double action revolver, single action revolver, flintlock, which is another. We have one energy weapon, the focus radiation crossfire. Grappling hook, grape shots we just talked about. The gyro-jets here are not the same as the self-propelled projectiles from Amethyst. These are way worse. They're still neat, but they have their own rules, which is the reason why they have a new property called the gyro property rather than the SPP property. And we have the Manifold Revolver, which I do believe is when the bullets are all the way inside the weapon. Pepper box, which a lot of people are, which are kind of famous. The fact that it has like 12 barrels, and that's fun. So it's 9 bullets, and they all have like 9 barrels, which is kind of cool. The ring pistol, which we've seen, which is on your ring. Pocket pistol, single action revolver. The throwers were that was an unlock for Kickstarter. So if you got first a certain value, I would add these weapons. Throwers are the rail guns of this setting, but they are extremely primitive rail guns. If you want to know how a thrower looks and how it operates, watch the film Prospect, which is a sci-fi film, which came out, I think, last year, the year before. Stars Pedro Pascal, and it is awesome. Very low budget, and I love it. And I love the way they did their weapons, and their weapons were called throwers. Triplex pinch pistol, which I do explain what these weapons are. Volcano. I didn't want to use name brand. So, for example, you won't see some of the name brands here. Sometimes, so I had to avoid it. So instead of saying the actual name brand of a weapon, I'll just call it the Grape Shot. So if you look up Grape Shot, you might be able to find what that weapon actually looks like. Oh yeah, so say how many weapons we have? All these one-handed small, all these two-handed small arms, and then all these heavy weapons. There's obviously, and then a few super heavy, and we go into the details of what these weapons look like and what they do. Armor piercing, augment, auto heavy. These are all carried over from ultra modern, but we have breach, direct is carried over. We have a new property called double, which weapons with multiple barrels. There's a draw property, which is new. The drum property, which is new. I think the feed is carried over. Flintlock hasn't been changed. Gyro is a new property that replaces the advanced rocket weapons. Fail to fire is something else. So if you roll a critical 1 on this weapon, it jams. Percussion is a new property. Shotguns have been changed because old shotguns, there are only like 2 damage values for shotguns. So I can say it's like, oh, it does +3 damage at a certain range. And because they're now shotguns that have massive range differentials, I have to change shotguns rules. So shotgun rules has been changed. And Sonic is here, even though I don't think there's actually any Sonic weapons in the game. I don't think, because I just copied them all, but I don't think there's any Sonic weapons actually offered. It's gonna be interesting. Someone's gonna, you have a Sonic property, but no Sonic weapons. Huh? Whatever. Then we have some specific weapons and talks about their properties. And then we're moving into Memphis Wong's illustrations, which are admittedly, they look a bit more digital. They look a lot more colorful. But he did his best to kind of, his interpretation of what the inscriptions look like, we can see them here, are very different than what I was looking. If you look at some of Nick's illustrations, you see he has a different illustration. But I do love this kind of these rings of magic that pop up. More guns. Now we have a chain weapon. Now a chain weapon you may think is the weapon that has, like, there's a pistol you can find that actually looks like has a chain that like hangs down and the bullets are off. It's almost a very primitive version of a belt weapon. That does exist, but it's called, if that's a manifold or the belt weapon. But the chain weapon, the weapons are inside, and there's a very large internal mechanism that fires a crap load of bullets. Then we have the Grape Shot. So this is the Grape Shot, and this is a weapon that has a shotgun undermount, which is the reason why it's called the Grape Shot. The Tuskar, which is a very bizarre weapon. If you want to know what that one actually looks like, you can go to Forgotten Weapons. Yeah, Manifold Revolver is a weapon that's a very bizarre one. It has multiple barrels and multiple um, chamber, so it's a very interesting weapon. Overkill, which are just high caliber weapons. The pepper box, which we have a pistol here. The perdition. Now there's an actual real shotgun you can get that has 14 barrels. It's a shotgun with 14 barrels, and it's an astoundingly wicked looking weapon. And Memphis decided to go vertical instead of horizontal, which was a very unique choice. And I have to admit, I really appreciate that option, that direction to have the bullets, have the barrels vertical instead of horizontal. I thought that was really funny. Once again, I wanted to have this section on this chapter. If I was smart, I should have only had them do illustrations for every second or third weapon. But in this situation, I have illustrations for weapons on top of each other, so I had to start spreading these out. So that's why I put this image here to help spread these out, because I had too many illustrations on one page. Even this one has 4 on one page. So I have this illustration that does only barely covered up by this torn piece of paper that I added in. So I thought that was kind of cool. I also like the fact that it slightly covers the pepper box image, and that was something intentional as well. The pinfire, this here is the repeating air rifle, which looks very different than what the real, yeah, so there's actual, that was one of the recent weapons I added just before I started doing layout. So yeah, there is an actual air rifle, and you have to pump it up, and there are some rules for it, and I think it's funny. I think I found out my game group were buying weapons more so just for the feel and the look of the weapons, which I really appreciated the fact that they went that direction. They weren't automatically looking for the most power for bang for buck. They were actually looking to get some variety. Here's our pinfire, which is this weapon right here, multiple barrels, the pocket blaster, our ring pistol, which is a cool touch, and then our big bore stopping rifle, which is that one right there. If there was an illustration for a weapon I wished I could have had, I think the Manifold would have been a nice one to illustrate. And then we have the volley gun, which is similar to the Perdition, but it just has fewer barrels. Ammunition rules and melee weapons were mostly carried over from Ultramodern. Same thing with the grenades were carried over from Ultramodern. Explosive combat hasn't been changed. Armor, that was tough. I was really trying to get I was definitely inspired by War Machine in the illustrations, but and my artists were like, they went off in their own direction. They created a bunch of designs which were not what I was expecting. So we have a bunch of armor designs. We have armor here, armor there. We have light, medium, and then the exo armor, because there are power armor in this story, but they're all kind of steampunk armor. These are all Memphis designs, and once again, he went in a very unique direction. Like I said, I don't know if these look like steampunk designs, but he definitely has some of the spirit in there, which I do appreciate. And once again, it was a real pain in the butt to space all these illustrations out. And then there's this other design there for the big dreadnought. The heralds, which are the heavy armor, they're big things. Some art, and now we're into gear. A lot of this gear was carried over from Ultramodern, so there's not much new that's been added here. But I did decide to add more cybernetics, and some of these are carried over from Ultramodern, but some of them are new. Like, for example, the number of inscriptions you can add on a limb. And we've got inscriptions, which I mentioned are these little etchings you can do to make an item magical. And there's a whole bunch of inscriptions. You can add them to weapons and armor or onto regulators. Big splatter of paint there. And then we have vehicles. And the vehicles I'm particularly proud of. This is going to be a hard thing to render, obviously. This is a big graphical image. That's for the Plex Codex. This is the only section that's this is not an illustration that you'll see in every book. Vehicles. We were pushing for less of the steampunk vehicles, although there's a few of them, and instead went heavy on trains. So once we copied over the vehicle rules, but we have a bunch of new stuff. We have the Cloud Runner, which is like an anti-gravity boat, and then we have, this is an actual type of aircraft. You can look up on the cyclogyro. It's a very bizarre craft. Then we have this kind of anti-gravity vehicle called the Ziggurat, which is an extremely advanced piece of technology. A steam trike, and then we have the trains, and then we have more trains images here. And this is once again to scale. This is a very big train, but I love the train looks that Nick was doing. Very imaginative. There's his Cloud. Once again, he put a little person for scale. So once again, this is a very large vehicle. We have, you got to have a monowheel. You know, monowheels are wicked in any setting, and it just screams steampunk. And this is an illustration that Jeremy Simmons sent to me, and he sent it to me at the perfect time because I needed something to fill up that space. Although I got a bit of mistake there I got to fix. There as well. You pick up on these mistakes as you check it out. And now we're on to the last chapter, which is monsters. Now, unfortunately, I don't have nearly as many monster images as I'd like, so there's a bunch of sketches I used to fill in the gaps. So the animex are the way that if you want to add in any D&D monster into the setting and without breaking the theme, you make it a robot. There's this machine, there are machines in the setting that are just creating robots that used to have you purpose. So, having a horse robot or a cow robot, beasts of burden and so forth. But after the collapse of the empire, because this is somewhat post-apocalyptic, it kept on making things. And so there's thousands and upon thousands of animals that look like robots. And it was interesting to look to have them not look like something from Horizon Zero Dawn. So we went for like a clockwork steampunk thing, but we don't actually have a lot of illustration. We only have one illustration for these things. But we also give you the rules to make your own, but we have a lot of examples here. Dragons and stuff. And we have one illustration here, which is going to be for the Tyrannosaurus Rex, because of course it is. And I like how clockwork it looks, a very steampunky kind of thing. Then we have bandits, because of course we have to. There's a lot of bandits. We were playing around the adversary rules and a bunch of stuff there. There's Mark again. There's another one. And this is kind of what I thought inscriptions would actually look like, more like that. But I like the look of what we have here. One more question for you. Update on Naramata. Naramata is on its way. It should be here next week. And well, I've got one more question. I'll wait until I'm near the end here because we're reaching the end of our little stream. Homunculus, which are things you can get. Leviathan. This Tigerwalkie was a creature that Nick created. He drew this. Then I had a creature called a Plagerwalkie, and the Plagerwalkie became this. Because the Plagerwalkie in the novel does not look like this, but I kind of teamed them up together because Nick drew this thing on his own. I really liked the stitch work, and that felt like a creature that would be out here. And then we have these biomechanical whales called Leviathans. I definitely often make stats for creatures that you will never fight. Screevers, which are zombies, so that's going to be a pain in the ass to render. And then we go into Shadow. This is the only creature that is copy-pasted. So this exact monster does show up in all three books. And there's a reason for it. If you read all the lore, there's an absolute in-game reason why there would be this creature repeated through all of them. Now, Virus does show up. Oh, this is definitely an older file because this image has been fixed. So I haven't rendered the new files yet. So this is, yeah, say about 99%. We still have a little bit of tweaks, but those have all been finished. So Virus is the other enemy that shows up in all three games. But although it's mentioned in all three games and they're present in all three games, they don't have the same stats. So the Jack, the Blight, and the Worm in Taurus don't show up in the other two games. They have their own versions of Virus. One image is carried over. So this image is unique to Paradise. No, this is unique to Conestoga and Taurus. And then there's an image that's unique to Taurus and Conestoga and so forth and so forth. And so this is the image that's really unique to that. And this is the virus form, a little bit inspired by the tornado creature from Mission to Mars, which is a very old movie. And that's it. And then we usually ended up with this big scrolling bunch of text. But this chapter here is not from Taurus. This is the first chapter of one of the other books. In this case, is the first chapter from Conestoga. So you can get the idea of how this affinity works. So we're looking at about 225 pages. And there's a big white gap here for some reason. But then we have our index, and then we have our Kickstarter backers, all of them. Very fine text. So there we go. That is 225 pages of Taurus. What do we have here? What do you think of the new D20 Modern? Oh, yeah, so that's launching on Kickstarter next month. As many people know, Ultra Modern 4 was very much inspired by the original D20 Modern. And I think personally that that we did a pretty good job adapting that to Ultra Modern 4, and then we did Ultra Modern 5, which converts that same idea. Ultra Modern 5 is, I mean, I'll just say it is probably the most popular non-fantasy setting. Just because we have two books and they're both Mithril sellers. Even the books I wrote for Ultramodern, like Affinity, like Apex and Neurospasta, have also done really, really well. But now we have dozens of non-fantasy settings out there. Some of them are well sold as Gold and Electrum and so forth. So to come out with D20 Modern now, I'm sure it's going to do well. There's a lot of nostalgic love, and the people who designed D20 Modern are doing this new one. I'm kind of at a point where what's that? Oh, Oh, but a spam popped up here. Let's get that out of there. Yeah, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it'd be nice to see, and I think considering the number of backers that they have saved up for this May launch, that they'll do very, very well. I'm not terribly interested in it just because when I needed to make a modern version of fourth or fifth edition, I wrote it, and it's been out for 5 years. So like that D20 Modern should have come out 5 years ago. That's what I'm saying. Right now, you're entering a market that's been saturated with a lot of other people who are doing the same project. So that's basically what I mean. Yeah. But yeah, okay. So that is basically it. How long have we been doing this for? Probably an hour. Oh yeah, an hour and 10 minutes. I was trying to keep this to an hour, which is not so bad. All right. So I will be doing these every time I do another game. So I'll probably do one for Conestoga, probably at the end of this week, or not sometime next week after that. Paradise should be done at the end of next week, so I'm still hoping that we are looking for a end of month or really early May release for all 3 digital books, which for a lot of backers is it. Like once you get your 3 digital books, you're done. You've got everything you asked for. But for everyone who wants the game in print, now we start the process of printing and we see if I made a good choice. Anyway, that's going to be it, folks. Thanks for tuning in. And for anyone who's watching this after the fact, thank you for showing up. And if you have any other questions I didn't answer, throw them in the comments and I will address them with the next stream. So anyway, guys, take care and